Do you suffer from painful, heavy periods, PMS, mood swings, or migraines? Are you tired of being told they are just normal parts of life? Or are you afraid your child's going to suffer these symptoms too? At Vividus, the full of life company, we take the pain, misery, and confusion out of those menstrual cycles and replace them with tools of empowerment and time management so you can be Vividus. Visit embracingflowpodcast.com for more information on transforming your cycles from ow to wow. Information shared on the Embracing Flow podcast is for educational purposes only. It does not constitute medical advice.
Ever felt frustrated being told PMS, heavy bleeding, and cramping are just normal parts of life? You're not alone. I loathed my monthly cycle for decades. That all changed when I earned 3 health coaching certifications discovering something incredible. Your period is vital. It is an outward sign of your inner health, and it holds the key to unlocking your full potential. I've been there battling heavy, painful periods, and I turn them into cycles with minimal PMS and cramping. Today, I'm on a mission to share that information with you. Pour a cup of your favorite drink, get comfy, and grab your headphones as we embark on a candid and empowering journey of self-discovery. Together, we'll demystify menstrual cycles, explore cyclical living, delve into natural birth control, and guide parents through those crucial period talks with tweens and teens. It's time to break the taboo around menstruation and embrace the wisdom it holds. I'm your host, Heather Almendinger, and this is the Embracing Flow podcast.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us on Embracing Flow. I'd like to introduce our guest today, an expert at Embracing Flow, Allison. Allison, how do you say your last name? I'm sorry.
Oh, no, it's okay. It's okay. It's Allison Yamamoto.
Okay. All right. I'm going to call you Allison because I'm going to butcher the daylights out of it. How are you
That's
today,
totally
Allison?
fine. That's totally fine. I'm doing well. How are you?
I am doing fantastic. Thank you so much for being on Embracing Flow. Guess here is why I have Allison visiting us today. She is a founder and exercise nutrition coach who helps active women stop overtraining and underfueling to get a regular period and feel more free around food and exercise. As a former NCAA cheerleader turned marathon runner, she struggled with REDS and missed her period for years before she recovered. Once she realized how prevalent it is, she created the program that has now helped hundreds recover using evidence-based strategies. I love that, Allison. We spoke before about REDS, and we will go into REDS a little bit more. But before we do that, I ask all of my guests if they would be willing to share one of their first experiences with their period and about what age were you when your period arrived?
Yeah, I love that question. Definitely something that I don't get asked on a regular basis, I would say. But one of my first experiences, I started my period when I was pre-high school. I can't remember the exact age, but I do remember that the moment that it occurred was in my childhood dentist office. And the only person that I told was my mom, who was amazing about it. She was excited, and yet she also was keeping it fairly confidential in the sense that I wasn't necessarily going to announce that to my dentist and the other participants in the dentist's office. But we ended up going out for dinner. I think that on a broader scale, though, one of my earliest experiences around my period was because I was so active, especially in younger years, navigating what felt like fairly alone, the decision about tampon, pad, how am I going to approach this? I also grew up in California, and so I was spending a lot of time during those years at the beach, outside, in my bathing suit. And so I remember during that period of time, me experiencing like a lot of confusion and potentially even shame around how am I supposed to navigate some of these new considerations that I need to have, that I'm not sure if my friends are having them or how other people handle them, or if everyone else is really clearly understanding how to navigate some of these questions. And so I do remember like early years being at the beach and trying to understand what decisions to make when it came to being on my period and in a beach setting, which is something that now when I reflect back on it, was a big deal at the time, but of course, something that I didn't talk about very often when I was going through that experience.
Yeah. I grew up in Pennsylvania. A lot of my time here has been in Pennsylvania. But yeah, the only big thing that happened to me in the dentist's office is I found out I had chicken pox. Surprise.
Oh, no.
But yeah, it's when you're that age, we were asked to go to Dorney Park, which is there's the regular amusement park and was also the water park. I'm like, Mom, I have my period. How am I going to do this? She's like, just put in a tampon. I'm like, what's a tampon? And I was probably 13 and I'd had my period for almost 3 years at that point. But I'm like, what's a tampon? How do you even use? Because I just didn't feel comfortable with it, and I didn't feel comfortable wearing it. It felt weird for me. Um, even now, years later, tampons are not my preferred product because it feels weird. I'll use a menstrual cup. I like my menstrual cup over a tampon, but for before I found out about menstrual cups and discs, it was a pad because tampons I didn't like them unless I had to go swimming in school. I had to go swimming in 7th grade for a semester. And yeah, I got my period during times that I had to go swimming. Learned you do need to change your tampon after you go swimming. You can't go swimming and then just change into regular clothes and go back to class. I found that out the hard way. Very embarrassing, but I'm not here to explain that, John, to everybody. We are here to get to know you. So with your cheerleading experience and with your marathon experience, you had experience with Reds. Can you explain what your experiences during your NCAA uh yeah, time frame, as well as how you discovered you had Reds, how you were feeling because you were missing those cycles, but then realizing that you really needed to have your cycle and that you were actually going down a very challenging road. If you would share that story with us. I know there's a lot of information right in there.
Yeah. So I will say that I have had a predisposition to being fairly active. So I grew up fairly active. My family's very active. And then when I got to college and I was an NCAA cheerleader, I was interested in health. That's how I would have probably identified myself. I was interested in looking up things about nutrition and understanding my fitness, and I valued being healthy. And so it's interesting because I didn't view myself as somebody that was particularly problematic around food and exercise. But over time, I can acknowledge now that some of the pressures that I was experiencing around body standards, combined with my interest in being fairly disciplined, but also fairly setting high standards for myself, is what eventually led to me taking it a little bit too far. I would say now, and along my whole journey around food and exercise. And essentially, what that looked like was during my time in college, there's a lot of pressure, especially during those transition moments in our lives. So when we're going from high school to college or college to afterwards or any of the other transition points where there's a disruption in either your routine or changes in your body and how your body composition might be presenting. And so especially in college, there can be a lot of pressure. You're meeting new people, there's new friendships, there's new routines and situations. And at first, there's a lot of pressure around what could happen to your body when you go to college that people talk about really frequently. And I think that further along in my collegiate journey, especially when you are in such a public setting where when you're cheering, you're in front of a ton of people. But I think that any woman especially can resonate with this, even if they weren't in a cheerleading setting, which is that there's a lot of pressure and there's a lot of judgment potentially around your body and how it's
Mhm.
changing there during that time. And so I think that that combined with my interest in being able to be more healthy around food and more intentional, and there's a lot of information around diet culture, what's good, what's bad, that eventually got to the point where I was graduating and getting more into running, ramping up my running, and kind of the high achiever in me would come out, and I would be running longer distances, more competitive with myself, to the point where I lost my cycle. And that was one of the first indicators that I had that something was even potentially off. And I hadn't heard of REDS. I had no idea what that was. And I had no idea. I suspected it was a problem, but I was going in to see medical professionals who were often telling me it's actually fine that you're not getting your cycle because you're super active. And that's actually somewhat expected. And you asked about, how my reaction was to originally not getting my cycle. And I still suspected that it was something that was off because I was so regular beforehand. But at the time, it wasn't necessarily something that for me was a point of pride either to have or to not have. It was just something I had normally dealt with on my own. And so the fact that I was missing it now, and if a doctor is telling me that it's fine and even expected because I'm exercising a lot to not have my period, I'm not really going to question that. But of course, I learned more about REDS over time and how much there were other symptoms that I was experiencing that were all related back to that core situation I was in around overtraining and underfueling that was impacting several other areas of my life, one of which was my period. And realizing that even though I didn't want to get pregnant immediately at that time, it was actually important for me to prioritize getting my period and getting my cycle for both my short-term and my long-term health in ways that I hadn't anticipated. And so that sort of leads into a lot of the overview of what REDS is, which I can go into at a really high level, and then we can dig in wherever it makes sense. But at a
Yeah.
really high level, RED stands for Relative Energy Deficiency in Sport. I think your listeners probably have heard a little bit more about this based on your previous episodes. But essentially, it's a condition that you're experiencing when you're overtraining or underfueling, in which the deficiency in energy that your body is getting from the amount of energy it's taking in relative to the amount of energy it's expending through any baseline bodily processes as well as activity that you're participating in will cause it to actually redirect energy from secondary goals, if you will, like reproduction or immune functioning, and then back to primary core bodily function. So this is just keeping the lights on, and it's funding essentially from an energy standpoint any of the activity that you're participating in. And the consequences of that state that you're in REDS is that it can impact anything from your bone health to, especially for folks that are participating in any sort of training and activity, impacting their performance, impacting their risk of injury, impacting their risk of sickness. And when I started to learn more and more about how my intention to be really healthy actually turned into this entire situation that was detrimental to my health, it was a huge shift that required, it didn't happen overnight, but required me to really rewrite and understand the situation I was in, where I truly believed, and other people would give me the validation of, you're really healthy, you're super disciplined. I wish I was more like you, to, oh, actually, the behaviors that I'm taking in service of my health are the exact same ones that are now hurting my own health. And that rewrite and reframe for me took a long time to really come to terms with. But it really was the first step in starting to take the right steps to correcting some of the behaviors that were leading to the situation I was in around REDS.
Would you be open to kind of sharing some of the other symptoms that you were noticing besides the missed period that kind of was triggering this really isn't, I don't think my body should be doing this. Okay, I'm missing a period. Doctors are saying okay. But what other symptoms were you experiencing that really said, no, this is not normal. This is outside of how a body's supposed to be reacting.
Yeah. And I love this question because I think, especially as active women, and especially if they're participating in any sort of endurance activity, but in general, I think that fitness culture promotes this idea that discipline and fitness means endurance. It means that you ignore any of these signs that could be indicating that things are off. And I had the perspective of, if I can push through it, it's not a big enough issue. And I would take that approach with everything. So if I had a minor injury, and I'm saying this sort of as a confession, which anyone who had a healthy relationship with exercise would take that as, this is a red flag to my body. I'm now going to rest in order to allow that appropriate recovery and then move forward. For me, it was more, if I feel like I could push through this, I'm going to, because it's too much anxiety or guilt around taking a rest day. And I can. I can do it. So why not continue to push through? And so I say that because it was really hard for me at the time to be hyper attuned to where other symptoms were coming into play. And in some cases, I hate to say it, but it wasn't until after I started to recover that I realized the true severity of how this was permeating various areas of my life. But this would include anything from, I realized that in training, there would be times where I would feel super burnt out about exercise. I would feel like I was forcing myself to work out. And sometimes people will describe this feeling of heaviness in their legs, which, again, if you're training and you're experiencing the normal fatigue of training, it's hard to differentiate between, is this a red flag or is this something that's normal? And in hindsight, it wasn't normal, but I would feel that fatigue constantly. And especially if I do a harder workout, the rest of the day, I'd be exhausted. I wouldn't feel like I had the energy to do a lot of other things, which at the time I thought was completely normal. And a lot of the other symptomatic factors were, so bone density. I highly encourage anyone who's experiencing this to work with an ortho or someone else who's specialized in sports medicine to get a DEXA scan and understand how your bone density is looking. And especially if that is a data point that you can track over time, then it's one of the biggest risks and one of the biggest reasons why a lot of endocrinologists that I've spoken to are specialized in this space may recommend some sort of short-term hormonal supplement, even though this can be completely treated through lifestyle factors if it's taking somebody too long to recover. So that's another one. I would say stress fractures is a huge sign or symptom that I see people coming to me with. Another one that I was experiencing really strongly was the amount of headspace that food was taking up in my brain. And so this was overfixation on food in a way that would come out in super subtle ways. So, for example, I would constantly be thinking about my next meal. And this is just a natural physiological response to what your body will do when it is underfed. And there are really famous studies that have been done that have shown that if you put anyone in a state where they're in quote unquote starvation, meaning that they're undernourished, that they'll automatically start to increase this fixation around food, which makes sense because it's your body signaling to you, let's get the nourishment that you quite frankly need right now. And so for me, that would present in a few different ways, which is thinking about the next meal or finding myself more interested to looking at really appetizing recipes or images of food, to feeling like I had to exhibit a lot of control and stress around food. So that could be trying to think about, if I had this thing today, well, how does that impact something I had later today? And a lot of other constant need or predisposition to optimize around food in ways that were really taking up a lot of headspace relative to other things that I could be focusing on. So that was another thing that I didn't at the time admit was a sign or symptom, but something that was also contributing. And one of the other factors that I was definitely experiencing, but didn't fully acknowledge that it was tied to all these other symptoms, was stress and anxiety. And as somebody who's already a high achiever, but also experiences a lot of self-criticism, self-doubt, that I did not have any business in doing anything that would be contributing more to my stress levels, because I already can become pretty anxious about certain situations or high stress. And so I can realize now in hindsight how much that was exacerbated by the situation I was experiencing with Reds and with underfueling and overtraining, that was really contributing to my stress levels during that period of my life. And so it's sort of a mix and blend of physiological symptoms, which included for me, I was feeling cold all the time, very dysregulated in my temperature. And I was also living in a place where I was in San Francisco. So it was windy and 50 degrees. And I'm from Southern California. So I'm used to more like 70 to 80 and warmer. So there were excuses that I could make for myself about why I was experiencing so much
Mhm.
cold, but it was definitely not normal in the sense that it was I was feeling cold all the time. When other people wouldn't be as cold, I would still be pretty cold. So that was a physiological one. Another one was I have really thick hair, but my hair would start to fall out more frequently, was another physiological symptom that I was experiencing. And another one was actually digestive issues. And this one is really interesting because I think that the digestive issues can lead you down a path of algorithms telling you that the solution for that is undoubtedly to restrict more food. And so that actually ended up being a really negative reinforcer where it was almost like an excuse for me to become more controlling around food. And it was super ironic because it was the opposite thing that I need to do to actually fix the issues that I was experiencing. But those are some of the more obvious, I would say, physiological experiences that I was having, on top of a lot of the psychological and more behavioral oriented symptoms and signs that were either yellow or red flags at the time. And if not, they definitely were now looking back.
Are those the same kind of symptoms that your clients come to you exhibiting, or are there different ones?
Yeah, those are a lot of those are very, very similar. I would say that there's definitely more that people will experience and that are slightly different. So, other ones that people might mention are thinness in their nails. They might experience really frequent urination. Some of their lab work can come back slightly irregular relative to how a quote unquote healthy person should be presenting. Another one is, I mentioned this before, but frequent injury, and that's not just stress fractures, although the amount of folks that come to me because stress fractures were the thing that really was the wake up call is very frequent, but any injuries are slightly higher frequency in this type of population, and also increased instances of being sick. So feeling like you're sick all the time or you're getting sick really frequently. Another one is irritability and low mood. So I mentioned, anxiety and stress, but feeling like it's really hard to emotionally regulate. Think it's it's a very different experience than being hangry, because hangry you're also feeling like this physiological hunger, but a lot of the folks that I work with are experiencing a lot of irritability where they feel like they can't control their emotions, or they're having really extreme emotional reactions to things. That can be very common as well. And so, it, and I can list several more, but it's just to say that there are a lot of different areas that when you think about this situation where you're missing your period, but then you also think about all the other areas, whether it could be impacting anything from how you're showing up in your relationships, to how you're showing up in your training, to how you're showing up in the workplace, in any of your academic pursuits, in any of the ambitions that you have. All of those areas in ways could be impacted by the same root cause that is sort of a blessing and curse. It's a blessing in the sense that if you address that thing, which is again completely addressable through lifestyle factors, you might gain in so many various areas of your life, which is really what inspired me to go back and focus my work on supporting other people, because it was something I wish I had done so much sooner. And it was an area where I had vastly underestimated the amount of improvements I would see across my life by focusing on this area. But the fears that I had in making me more hesitant to seek changes were also really real and things that I had to work through and feel ready to be able to face in and that's what, caused me to lay it for a while, but that really was that breaking point for me and also seeking recovery. The thing that is the most heartbreaking for me is when people are experiencing these significantly more critical end of the spectrum symptoms, and that's what's encouraging them to seek change versus some of these leading indicators, if you will, that are more manageable, but they are starting to show up those signs to you that something is off, that something is dysregulated. And that is such a better time to seek some of these changes before some of these more pervasive and harder to navigate challenges and health risks start to present.
What are some of those things that can start changing the perspective? I know that mentally, I mean, you're training and you're thinking you have this great relationship with food because you're healthy, and you're finding out you're not. Is there, I mean, there's that headspace that you have to wrap around your head that, oh my goodness, I do need to eat food. Food is my friend versus food is I can't gain any weight. Um, how do you wrap your head around that? How do you get into a better, how did you like get into where you're at now that you are in a better place mentally, physically from where you were as that marathon runner that was experiencing all this? How do you get your clients into a better space?
Yeah. For me, the biggest thing was learning about the risk factors. So understanding the risk factors and really truly everything that I just mentioned and, some more, that was what helped me with that reframe. And I had a hunch that something was off. And I think that most folks experiencing this type of condition, even in the earlier days, they have a suspicion because behind a lot of the people like us who are presenting as super disciplined around food and exercise, although we're getting praise for it and we're being told we're healthy, and maybe even people are saying that they're envying us or that they want to know what we're doing or what our secret is. And that's one of the things that makes it really hard. But there's a voice oftentimes inside our heads that doesn't feel like what we're doing is super healthy in the sense, and this is a perfect example of the thing that I alluded to earlier, which is not being able to take a rest day without feeling guilt, not being able to eat certain foods because you're feeling guilt, or being in social situations or hesitant to be in social situations because food is going to be a huge factor in how much you can navigate that experience comfortably. And so all of those things are already things that are really exhausting, quite frankly. And the amount that you feel like you need to exert that control. And I think that this is one of the things that is a huge myth that I focus on with a lot of the folks that I work with, especially, which is that the only way for you to be fit or for you to be healthy is this one way. And it's requiring all this control and it's requiring all this discipline and forcing yourself to do all of these things all the time because otherwise you'll just lose it all. You'll lose all your fitness. Is one of the biggest myths that I see people experiencing. And I think it's a testament to a lot that we see either through other people we're seeing online or through information that we're trying to gather that may or may not have even been information that was targeted at us. But it reinforces this belief that, oh, if I let go from holding on this tight, then I'm going to lose everything, which isn't the case. And that's the true narrative that we have to work through oftentimes with the folks that I'm working with. That's really, really hard because of how much we've developed a sense of safety in that routine that we have. And so one of the first things that I had started to do, and I think one of the things that I see as a very common pitfall is because we have gone down this path already of seeking safety and comfort and assurance in exhibiting more control or more discipline or just getting more information, especially around nutrition and fitness, can become a rabbit hole that's reinforcing. So, oh, I'm experiencing these issues, menstrual disturbances, some of these other symptoms, maybe digestive issues, maybe low libido, other things. How can I use food as a way to improve my situation here? And instead of the fairly simplistic, unfortunately, nutrition techniques and changes that need to be made, instead, because there's so much information about, okay, well, this food is bad, or this decision around food is bad, or you should never do this, or you need to do this, that there's no shortage of information about how you can optimize. That's actually only further contributing to our issue and maybe even also our stress. And so when I learned about what the actual research says, and fortunately, there's actually a significant amount of research now and continuing to come out about how you can address and manage some of these reds like situations that you can fall into around overtraining, underfueling, and what you actually need, that when I started to make those changes and actually seeing the results myself, it became the biggest driver for me in being able to democratize some of those frameworks for other people, because it's actually not as complex, I would say, um as what can be super confusing in the nutrition space and conversation that's happening through so many different channels, because it's so easy to get information nowadays, that it's so easy to get an overload of all of these things that you need to do, when some of the things that are the mistakes that people are making are often not what's actually being talked about in these spaces enough. And oftentimes that's this mistakes that are actually contributing to so many of the symptoms that people are experiencing. I'm not saying that it's obvious in the sense that it's easy to make the changes, but I am saying that some of the nutrition advice and fixes that could be game changing for someone isn't always a super hyper optimized exact protocol that requires these minute supplements and exact cycle syncing mechanisms, as much as there's pretty low hanging fruit that a lot of people, almost most of the people that I'm seeing with, are very pattern based, frequency, and predictably experiencing on a case to case basis, that I understand where that's coming from because of I was making the exact same mistakes. And there's a reason for that.
I'm guessing not enough protein, not enough fat, not enough carbohydrates, poor sleep habits. Is just some of the things that, because there's the things just in general that I see with those who have not necessarily have reds, but are in the athletic world, but also those that are just the diet culture in general. It's restrict calories, restrict calories, restrict calories. The more I restrict calories, the healthier I'll be, the more I'll be able to lose the weight. Yet you're actually, your body needs, if you, especially if you're exercising, your body needs that fuel. It needs the protein, it needs the fat, it needs the carbohydrates in order to build the muscle that you're, and to lose the weight. What are a few things that, if someone's not quite ready to work with a coach, or actually just wants to start working on themselves, what are some 2 or 3 major things that she can look at to put herself in a better position with either nutrition or with mindset? Um, what are some things that she could do?
Yeah. And I think that this is super interesting because what I was mentioning earlier is that I think that a lot of the prototype of this person, their default mode is seeking more and more and more information, which is great. And I think that some of the things that people underestimate how much they should be prioritizing in the areas that aren't necessarily the factual based prescriptive guidelines is also one of the biggest issues that's undermining what is actually keeping people stuck. So let me provide a really tangible example. So there's information, right, about, okay, exactly from a nutrition standpoint, what you should be doing, what are some mistakes that you're making in your training, and we can always go through and talk about those because it is important and folks should know. And there are instances where people aren't educated on that, and that's really, really important. So I think that as a first step, understanding the basics when it comes to energy availability is really important. So energy availability when it comes to not only, I think that a lot of people think that it's just calories in, calories out. That's not really the case, actually. And understanding what that means, especially for your activity level, especially if you're coming from a place of reds, then what you need and what your profile looks like is often a little bit different than what somebody who's not coming from a place of reds would need from a nutritional standpoint. And breaking down the myth that if you're an active woman, having a missed period is just a normal thing that's supposed to happen because you're active. That is not the case. And I want women to be active. I think women should be active. I think that's amazing. And there's so much potential for women if they do have any interest in pursuing a sport of any kind. It could be ultra running, it could be climbing, it could be gymnastics, whatever it is. And that there's a lot of power in being able to do that and have a regular menstrual cycle. The things that other are outside of that realm that I think are also worth considering are starting to understand what the drivers are when it comes to your exercise and nutrition relationship, if you will. And this is one of the areas that I really encourage people to start because that is what will actually make the changes that you're starting to embark on sticky, and it will help you better understand yourself in other aspects of your life. But without addressing some of those underlying changes, it will feel like such an uphill battle trying to make some of these changes when it doesn't have to be. And that's one of the biggest things that I start to focus on with the folks that I work on. But some of the themes, and I actually have a resource that I'm happy to provide your audience. It's completely free that can help them understand what their drivers are when it comes to how they're relating to food and exercise that's specific to them. But some of the thematic areas could be things like perfectionism, which is what are the standards that you're setting for yourself? And I was not somebody who identified as a perfectionist because I thought that perfectionism meant that your spaces were always completely clean, you were always perfectly polished, everything was super orderly. And I'm not like that. Some people are like that, which I think is a great, and I extremely envy those people. But for me, perfectionism shows up in the way of the standards that I set for myself are just extremely high. And that I did recognize and identify with in myself. And that can be one thing that can contribute to or be very intertwined with some of these aspects that are keeping you in the cycle of overtraining and underfueling. And an example of this could be a standard is I need to exercise every single day in order to maintain my fitness, or I need to do X number of cardio sessions in order to be healthy and fit. And in some regards, there are research backing some of these fitness goals that people have for sure. But I think that the transition into perfectionism occurs when there's rigidity and when some of those standards are unachievable or just unrealistic. And so that's one area. I think another area that is a really common theme is the theme around body image. And this can be a tricky topic because I find that there are some people that are really willing and open to admit, yeah, I have challenges with my body image for sure. That's something that I identify with and I experience. And there are other people that are very much resistant to facing what challenges they might experience around their body image, which also completely makes sense, because if you're somebody who identifies as valuing yourself more based on other achievements that you have, or based on your ambition, or based on your health, or based on your competence, or whatever else it is, that it can be very hard to admit that body image is something that you struggle with. So it's not something that every single person will come to me and say, this is something I need to work on. But it is an interesting factor, because for me, at least, I was not somebody who would admittedly have been like, yes, body image is something that I very much pride myself on and think that that is something that I identify with strongly. And yet, if I'm being honest with myself, I think that some of the changes that I had to make, I resisted making for a very long time, because I was scared about the uncertainty of what that would mean for my body. That, I think, is a very common through line that I see with people that I work with, which is, I'm scared to make any of these changes because I'm scared of what this will mean for my body. What will happen? Either the uncertainty of that, or just immediately going down to the worst case scenario and being scared of that worst case scenario and then running the other direction.
Yeah. It is.
Especially for somebody who's already super interested in their fitness and their health. I think that that can be one of the things that's really challenging to overcome. But yes, sorry, I interrupted you.
Nope, you're fine. Um, with the body image though, I mean, is it partly that they are afraid that if they stop training and they start fueling their energy that they're going to gain weight, or is that a big issue with that, or what? It's what are some of the things with the body image, because I know that that is a big one. Just brief examples of what some of the common ones are, or even some of the mild uncommon ones, so that way if someone is thinking, oh, I don't have a body image issue, but then hearing, oh, that, oh, I that is how I view things, maybe I do, if especially if they're experiencing some of the other symptoms of reds.
Yes. So one of the biggest concerns, you hit it on on the head, which is weight gain. The fear of weight gain and the fear of losing fitness is a huge theme when it comes to seeking recovery from reds. And the reality is that people who are experiencing reds, they don't fall into a specific weight class or body type. So people from any body, in any body, could be experiencing reds. We don't know. It's not just a certain aesthetic. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is, weight gain is sometimes involved, sometimes it's not involved. It's not sure, but because a lot of the folks that are in this type of situation where they're overtraining, where they're underfueling, typically have a belief that they do care to some extent about their physicality, that, well, if I'm going to start eating more, then that automatically means that I'm going to gain weight. And I think that personally, I think that, well, that first of all, I think that fear is completely valid. I think it's a valid fear, and I completely understand, especially in the context that we all just exist in, why anyone would have that fear and why that'd be a completely valid fear. I also tend to think that that's actually the wrong conversation to be having, in that it's not necessarily about weight gain or not weight gain, as much as it's about whether or not you're going to love and appreciate your body in whatever form it is, at the point that it is fueled appropriately and you have energy availability and you're no longer overtraining, you're no longer underfueling. And I think that that is actually the more interesting conversation to have, because every single person has a very unique and interesting story around their body, the beliefs that they have, the pressures that they've experienced. And that's where I think there's a lot more nuance in terms of let's talk less about the weight gain or the weight loss and talk more about how you're relating to your body and what you want that experience to be like, and also what your expectations are in terms of achieving certain body standards. It's a hard thing to distill into one or two frameworks or techniques or quick fixes, if you will. But I do think that that's one of the things that really inspired us through Ally and the program that I've built to develop such an individualized approach. Because although you can give people meal plans and general frameworks and criteria and the information, that's a piece that is harder to address in isolation, or also more challenging to address in a more group or less individualized approach. But overcoming and really exploring some of those topics is something that I find that once that's overcome, it makes it much easier for these changes to persist over time and to be able to have honest conversations in a space that many folks that are coming to us haven't really spoken about and explored in any way prior.
I love it. Where can individuals find you, find more about what you do, potentially work with you?
Yes, all the things. The website for Ally, which is the program in individualized coaching and mentorship, is available at theallymethod.com. And I also take on individual clients, work with them directly. And I also just talk about this a lot. And I try to provide education and information through my own Instagram. That's at Allison Yamamoto. And I am recently also on TikTok. So very open to feedback about anything, any questions you have, any things that really resonate, or that feedback that you might have. I'm also on TikTok at Allison Yamamoto. So either Instagram or TikTok at Allison Yamamoto, my name, and or on the website, theallymethod.com.
And yes, you had mentioned about the free gift. Love to put that. That can also be, all of the links can be found in the show notes. Before we leave, do you have any wise words of wisdom for us to take with us?
I would say, because we brought up the subject of perfectionism, that if you are, I saw a quote that was similar to this that really resonated with me. So I'm going to try to reframe it here, which is that if you feel like you're experiencing a lot of self-doubt and a lot of criticism, that the problem may not actually be with you. It might actually be with the standards that you're setting for yourself. And I love that message. It really resonates with me. And I would love to hear from you if you felt like that resonated with you as well.
That definitely does resonate. So thank you so much, Allison, for taking us on this enlightening journey into your background, and especially with REDS, because I know it impacts a lot of individuals that don't really realize it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Oh, you're welcome. Again, thank you so much for being here. All of the links can be found in the show notes. Thank you, listeners, for spending your time with us today. If you found a nugget of wisdom or a moment of empowerment, my mission is accomplished. Do you know someone who could benefit from this information? Please share Embracing Flow with them. So until next time, my friends, love hard, laugh often, and as always, be vividous. See you soon.
Thank you so much for joining us today on Embracing Flow. If you enjoyed this episode, please follow the show, submit a rating and review, and share it with your friends. Visit my website to receive your free PDF on 4 ways to decrease PMS. The link is in the show notes. Until next time, love hard, laugh often, and as always, be vividous.
Information shared on the Embracing Flow podcast is for educational purposes only. It does not constitute medical advice.